Okay, so we look at problem number 1 on our pre-calculus review. It says evaluate, and it has f minus g of x for f of x equals 4x plus 1 and g of x equals x minus 2. Just need to remember that that just means we're going to go ahead and subtract those. So subtracting these two. So I'm going to go ahead and take f of x. So you'll notice that this actually means f of x minus g of x. So here's my f of x equation. It's 4x plus 1. I'm going to subtract my g of x equation, x minus 2. So now subtracting these, I can go and distribute that negative on through. So distributing the negative on through, that's going to change my equation to negative x plus 2. Now I just go ahead and combine like terms. I got 4x minus x is going to be 3x, and 1 plus 2 is going to be a positive 3. So my answer number 1 is going to be 3x plus 3. Okay, on number 2, it says it wants me to find the inverse of this equation. So remember your definition of inverse is, your definition of inverse, step number 1, you're going to change f of x to y. Step number 2, you literally switch your domain and your range, or your x and your y values. So that means that my y becomes an x, and my x becomes a y. So now I have to solve the equation for y. So solving this equation for y, I'm going to go ahead and multiply both sides by 2. And when I do that, I get 2x. And when I do it to this side, the 2's cross out. I'm just left with y minus 12. Continue my solving for y. I'm going to add 12 to both sides. And I end up with 2x plus 12, all equals y. Now that I've found the inverse, I just need to go ahead and change that back to a function and our new notation. So I'm going to change this y to f inverse of x, all equals 2x plus 12. Okay, on this next problem, it says that I have my pair of points. On number 3, it says find the slope of the line passing through the pair of points. I got negative 7 and 3, and 3 and 3. So I just need to go ahead and use my slope equation. So here's my slope equation. I just take the second y minus the first y, all of the second x minus the first x. So substituting those numbers in. So remember, this right here is your first y. This is your second y. This is your first x. And this is your second x. So I'm just going to take these and subtract them, and then simplify it. So when I subtract these two, scroll down here. So I take this, and I got 3 minus 3. So that was my second y minus my first y. And now my second x minus my first x will be a 3 minus a minus 7. Simplifying this down, 3 minus 3 is 0. 3 minus a minus 7 is going to be 10. And then I just have to go ahead and divide those two. So when I divide 0 by 10, well, 0 divided by 10 is just going to be 0. So that is my answer. The slope passing through those pair of points is 0. On number 4, it says that it wants me to go ahead and the directions say graph the following equation. So it wants me to graph this. So to be able to graph this, I notice first off I need to locate my center. So I find the answer to x minus 2, which is 2. I find the answer to y minus 1, which is 1. And then my radius is just going to be the square root of this number, which is square root of 4, which is 2. So now that I have those two pieces of information, I can go ahead and make my graph. So that's what I do. I make my graph here. And then I come over here to 2 and 1, and I put my dot there. That's my center. So here's my center at 2 and 1. And then it has a radius of 2. So now I'm going to move down 2. I'm going to move right 2. I'm going to move up 2. And I'm going to move left 2. And then I just go ahead and sketch it in. And that's what my circle will look like. On number 5, the directions. See, on number 5, it says find the slope, intercept, form of the equation, the line that passes through the given point and has the indicated slope. So here's negative 1 and 5. Here's my slope of 1. I can use y equals mx plus b, or I can use y minus y sub 1 equals m times x minus x sub 1. I'm just going to go ahead and use the second one right here, because here is my y value that goes in. So remember, this is your y. This right here is your x. Your negative 1 is your x. So I'm going to substitute that in negative 1. And then here's my slope, which equals 1. Substituting that in and simplifying it down, I've got y minus 5. X minus minus 1 makes that an x plus 1. I'm going to go and distribute my 1 on through. So distributing my 1 on through, I get y minus 5. Distribute the 1 on through, I get x plus 1. Now I just need to add 5 to both sides. And I get my answer of y equals x plus 6. On number 6, the directions say on number 6 that I've got my two equations. It says I have f of x, and then it says equals x plus 5, g of x equals 9x minus 1. And now notice the directions say find f composite g of negative 3. So f composite g of negative 3. So here's our little composite symbol here. So this is the same as f of g of negative 3. So sometimes I like to rewrite that just to remind myself the direction I need to go. Because what this is telling me is it's telling me to take my negative 3 and put it in my equation g and find that answer. So here's my equation g. I'm going to put negative 3 into it. And when I do that, I get 9 times negative 3 minus 1. So let's go ahead and simplify that down. So simplifying this down, so we'll take 9 times negative 3. That's going to be negative 27 minus 1 is going to give me a negative 28. So now that I know that I have negative 28 is my answer. So there's negative 28. I'm going to substitute it into my f equation. So negative 28 goes into f. Let's go find my f equation here. So my f equation, it says, is x plus 5. So I'm going to substitute in negative 28 into that f equation. Substituting that negative 28 in the f equation. So remember, f of x all equals x plus 5. And substitute negative 28 into it. This means me with negative 28 plus 5. And negative 28 plus 5 is going to be negative 23. Okay, on the next problem. On number 7, it says the intensity I of light received from the source varies inversely as the square of the distance d from the source. If the light intensity is 2-foot candles at 16 feet, find the light intensity at 19 feet. So writing my equation, here's my equation. Here's my light intensity equals, it's the inverse of the square of the distance d, so that's d squared. Now remember, we need to find this. This is a type of slope, so we need to find our k value. So to find our k value, I'm going to use substitution. Now it says the light intensity is 2-foot candles at 16 feet. So the light intensity is 2-foot candles at, and I'm going to substitute into here, 16. So solving this, I'm going to take 16 and square it. And when I take 16 and square it, I get 256. That all equals 2. I'm going to go ahead and multiply by 256 to both sides to find out what my value of k is. So that constant of variation, also type of slope. So when I do that, here's my constant variation is 512 equals k. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and substitute this in. So now here is my equation is I equals 512 all over d squared. So remember, we just found k by substitution. Now we're going to answer the question. The question actually asks me, it says, find the light intensity at 19 feet. So 19 feet would be a distance. So I'm going to take my 19. I'm going to substitute it in place of my d into my equation. So when I substitute it in, I end up with this expression, this equation. I got 512 divided by 19 squared. Go ahead and put that into my calculator, and we'll see what that answer is. So putting this in my calculator, I'll bring up the calculator here. I'm just going to go ahead and take 512, and I'm going to divide that by 19 squared. And that looks like that comes out to be 1.418. So I just go ahead and round that off to 1.42 foot candles. On number 8, number 8 says determine the intervals on which the function is increasing, decreasing, or constant. So remember, intervals are the x values where the graph is increasing, goes up from left to right, and is then decreasing, it goes down from left to right. So if I look closely at my graph, I just have to identify and make sure I'm using the x values as I look at my graph here. So my x values in my graph. So on my x values, let's take a look at this. And I'm going to go ahead and let me bring up the Okay, let me go ahead and bring up the graph and take a look at it. So taking a look at this graph right here, you're going to notice the x values. So I'll turn on my writer here. So notice the x values start right here. And so my x values are going up all the way up until I get to right there. And then they start going down to right there. And then they're going up again. So notice this is up. So up is where it's increasing at. So down is where it's decreasing. And then up again is where it's increasing. But I want to make sure I'm using my x values. So this x value right here looks like it stops at -1. And then this x value right here stops at 3. So when I go ahead and write this, I'm going to go from -infinity to -1, and that is where it is increasing at. And then it starts decreasing, and it's going to be decreasing. It goes from -1 to 3. And then it starts increasing again, so I'm going to use this little union symbol, and it increases from 3 to infinity. Okay, going back to our solution guide, let's take a look at this next problem. So on this next problem, so I just go ahead and write all this down, show you where it's increasing and decreasing. So on number 9 says write the linear function that has the indicated values. So I just need to remember a linear function. So I need to remember this x, this 2 is my x value, this 0 is my y value. So I can actually write this as an ordered pair of 2 and 0. Also, f of 4 equals 4. This is also an xy pair. So I can write that as an ordered pair of 4 and 4. So the very first thing I need to do is I need just to remember that I can use either one of those linear equations to write my linear function. I can use y minus y sub 1 equals m times x minus x sub 1, or I can use y equals mx plus b. So let's see which one. First I need to find my slope. So to find my slope, I decided to go ahead and use this equation right here, y equals mx plus b. So to find my slope, I just need to take my second y minus my first y, and my second x minus my first x. So you remember ordered pair was 2 and 0, and it was also 4 and 4. So I'm going to go ahead and take this and subtract it. So I'm going to take 4 minus 0, finding my slope, and I take 4 minus 2, finding the slope right here. So 4 minus 2 is going to equal 4. 4 minus 0 is going to equal 4, and 4 minus 2 is going to be 2. So you're going to notice that gives me a slope, just scroll on down here, of 2. So now that I know that my slope is 2, using my y equals mx plus b, I'm going to go ahead and substitute that in and find out what my b is equal to. So let me scroll on up here. So using my ordered pair, so the pair that I chose to use was the ordered pair of 2 and 0. Doesn't matter which one you use, they'll both come out with the exact same answer. Remember, this is your x and this is your y. So using mx plus b, so I'm going to substitute this in. Now I'm going to substitute in my slope, which I just found was 2. So my slope is equal to 2. I'm going to substitute that in place of the m. So here it is right here. Now I'm going to substitute in my 2 for my x. And now I can find out what my b is equal to. So 2 times 2 is 4. So I got 4 plus b, all equals 0. Now I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. I get b equals -4. So now I have my two pieces of information that I need to use my y equals mx plus b form. So here's my slope. I substitute that in place of m. Here's my y-intercept, which is -4. And now I change my y to f of x. And there's my answer. F of x equals 2x minus 4. Okay, looking at this next problem on number 10, it says that it wants to go ahead and graph the equation f of x equals the absolute value of x minus 5. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're just going to want to go ahead and locate where this shape moved to. And you'll notice that the shape is an absolute value shape. So since it is an absolute value shape, this did create a V shape. So just remember all of your basic shapes. And you can go ahead and just do the location of it just by looking at this part right here. Well, that part right there, the answer, that is 0. And then, of course, the -5 is in answer form. So the location of the absolute value is moved to 0 and -5. So we go to 0, we go down to -5, put our dot there, and then just draw in our V. And that's what our graph will look like. On this next problem, on number 11, again, a graphing problem, and we're going to be graphing from our basic shapes. And this time, I do notice that this shape is squared, so that means it's a parabolic shape, or in other words, it's going to be a U shape. So I just need to locate where this U shape moved to. So again, taking the answer from the equation of x minus 2, you're going to get an answer of 2. This is already an answer form, so that's 5. So that means that my shape moved to 2 and 5, so I go to 2 and 5, put my dot there, and I draw in my parabolic, or my U shape. And that's what your graph will look like. On this next problem, on number 12, working some more with your graphing, it says on number 12 that we have f of x equals the square root of x plus 5. It says use a graphing tool to graph a function and use a horizontal line test to determine whether the function has an inverse. So I'm going to bring up your calculators. Make sure that you can put your equations in your calc. Your calculator is very helpful. Let's see if I can keep this over here. So turn on your calculator. Go to your graph at y equals, clear out anything that's in there. And now we're just going to hit the square root key, which is above this x squared key. And then we're just going to type in the equation x plus 5. And I didn't hit a zoom standard because it looks like the window's changed a little bit. So let me change this by zoom. Hit number 6 for zoom standard. That'll change it back to 10 by 10 view rectangle. And of course, I know that from what I've learned is that this answer is -5. This answer is 0. So of course, -5 and 0. There's my graph. I can see that on my calculator here. But if I use my vertical line test, you'll notice it does not intersect in any more than one spot. So the answer is yes. It has an inverse. And I'm supposed to be using the horizontal line test. So let me draw my lines the other way. So if I draw my lines horizontally, you'll notice it still only intersects in one spot. And so that is, yes, it has an inverse. And the other one, of course, determines whether it is a function or not. So on this next problem, on number 13, it says that find the zeros of the function by factoring. So remember, the very first thing that you want to do when you're factoring is see if there's a common number that can come out. So we've got a 6, we've got a 36, and we've got a 48. So the biggest number that goes into all three of those. So make sure you know your multiplication table. If you don't know it that well, make sure you're going through those flashcards that I posted on OneNote for you. So I know that the biggest number that can come out is 6. And then I look at the variables separately. The biggest number of variables that can come out of those three right there, x to the 4th, x cubed, and x squared, is going to be x squared. So I'm going to factor that out. I'm going to factor out 6x squared. Now remember that factoring is a type of division. And so as I'm doing this problem, all I'm doing is dividing. So I just take 6, divide by 6, and that's going to give me a 1 right here. X to the 4th divided by x squared is just going to be x squared. And of course, I don't write the 1 in front of my x squared. So I take 36 divided by 6, and that gives me the -6. -36 divided by 6 is -6. X cubed divided by x squared is going to leave me this x. And then I'm going to take 48 divided by 6, that gives me the 8, and x squared divided by x squared is 1, and that's why it's just 8 by itself. So now that I have 6x squared times x squared minus 6x plus 8, of course you can check by redistributing and see if you get that original answer right here, and you do. So I know that I factored it correctly. So now I just look at this, I know the factors of 8 that add to be 6, so I know that my numbers are going to be 4 and 2. They both have to be negative, because a negative 4 and negative 2 gives me that negative 6. So then I just factor down to my binomial, and I get x minus 4 times x minus 2. Now when I'm done doing that, I take each factor and set it equal to 0. So I got 6x squared equals 0. I divide by 6. I get x squared equals 0. I take the square root, and so x equals 0. So that's the answer to my first factor, is x equals 0. I go to my next one, I have x minus 4. So I can set x minus 4 equals 0 and solve it. So I add 4 to both sides, and I get that x equals 4. So there's my second answer, of x equals 4. Now here's my third answer right here, with this factor right here of x minus 2. So I got x minus 2 equals 0. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides, so I get x equals 2. And there's my third answer. Now you're going to notice that this did say that there's 4 answers. Well, this is known as a double answer right here. This is called a double root. And some books will label this as a double root. You can if you want to, but that just means it counts twice towards our total of 4. So that x equals 0 happens twice. That's 2, 3, and 4. And later on in the book, we'll show you what happens graphically when we do have a double root. So those are kind of nice to keep track of. Okay, on this next problem on number 14, it says evaluate the function of the specified value of the independent variable and simplify. Notice this is a piecewise function. A piecewise function means that you have 2 or more equations that make up your function. So my first equation says that I have negative 1/6 x. My second equation says that I have negative 10 minus 3x squared. Now notice I cannot use both equations to find these answers with. If I do, that means that it won't be a function. It means that I'll have 2 answers to it, or in other words, my domain is paired up twice. So that's why they give you these guidelines. So basically what this is saying is use the top equation if x is less than 1, and then use the bottom equation if x is greater than or equal to 1. You're going to notice your domains do not overlap. If they did, I would not have a function here. So all I have to do when I'm doing these problems is decide which equation to use. So notice this first one on A says find f of 1. So I come over here to my criteria and I see which one it matches. When I substitute this in, 1 is not less than 1. So I do not use my first equation. When I put 1 in here, 1 is greater than or equal to 1. That is a true statement. So that means that I go ahead and use my second equation to substitute it in. So you'll notice to find f of 1, I did substitute in my 1 into my first equation. And I don't know why I put a little negative here. That shouldn't be there. That should just be a positive 1. So substituting in 1 right here, and it doesn't matter because it's squared anyway, but 1 squared is 1, so 1 times 3 is 3, and negative 10 minus 3 is going to be your first answer. On A, we'll go ahead and scroll down to it, and that first answer is going to be negative 13. Okay, on B, it says it wants me to find f of 0. So to find f of 0, I got to go check to see which domain it matches with. So I'm looking at my 0 here. I got to decide if it's the first or second equation I want to use. Let me scroll back up here to my equations. And you'll notice that this right here, 0 is less than 1, is the true statement. So that's the equation I want to use. I want to substitute that into negative 1/6 x. And so that's what I'm going to do. So when I scroll down here and take a look at it, I'm going to use my first equation. So using my first equation, I substitute in 0. I get negative 1/6 times 0. And of course, negative 1/6 times 0 is just 0. So my answer B is f of 0 equals 0. Now I'm going to find, on C, I want to find f of 2. So to find f of 2, then come back up here to my guideline and see which domain that matches. So up here, looking at 2, that matches this second one because 2 is greater than or equal to 1. So this is the equation I'm going to use. I'm going to substitute 2 into my x value. We'll scroll down here and take a look and see how we did that. So substituting in our 2, looks like I did write the correct number in here. So I've got negative 2 minus 3 times 2 squared. Of course, 2 squared is going to be 4, and negative 3 times 4 is going to be negative 12, and then negative 10 minus 12 is going to be negative 22. Okay, on this last one, I'll scroll up to it. And it looks like I put it up top here so I can see it a little bit better. So it says I want to find f of, and then the equation is 1.7. So now substituting in the 1.7 to see which one it matches. Well, it looks like it's going to match this second equation because 1.7 is greater than or equal to 1. So I'm going to use my second equation and substitute in that second equation. I'm going to go ahead and put 1.7 in place of my x. So now substituting that in, I've got negative 10 minus 3 times 1.7 squared. So I square the 1.7. And then, so let's see, what is 1.7 squared? Put that in my calculator real quick. So let's slide it over here. Put x on out of here. So now I've got negative 10. And I'll just type it all in my calculator once, minus 3. And then I've got 1.7. And in parentheses squared. And hit enter, and that comes out to be negative 18.67. Okay, looking at this next problem. So on this next problem here, it says that we have on number 15, it says, sketch the graphs of the following functions. So again, just some more testing of your knowledge of graphs. Make sure you have all those basic graphs memorized. So of course, it starts off with my basic graph of x cubed. Well, x cubed is just that basic graph, that little sideways S shape, going up as you're going from left to right, and that's what your graph will look like. Now going down to this next one, it wants me to f of x, or h of x equals x cubed minus 2. So of course, this produces 0 for my answer. This is negative 2, so my location moved to 0, negative 2. And then I just go ahead and draw it in. Then on C, it says I've got x plus 2 cubed. So again, answer this equation, x plus 2 is negative 2. Of course, I don't see the 0 here, but that's going to be 0. That means that I move to negative 2 and 0. And I draw in my basic shape. So just some more tests on your basic knowledge of your graphs. Okay, on number 16, it says that we have, it says find the difference quotient. It says we got f of x plus h minus f of x all over h. So our difference quotient, so remember this says find f of x plus h. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to substitute that in. So now notice I put it in place of my x, and I get 3 times x plus h plus 7. So substituting that in, there's my first part. Then it says it wants me to subtract my original equation. I already have my original equation right here. That is 3x plus 7. And then when I'm all done, it says it wants me to divide by h. So if I do this correctly, everything's going to cross out except for the terms that have h by it. So my next step is I'm going to go and distribute my negative on through. So distributing my negative on through, I still have my 3x plus 3h plus 7. That's my f of x plus h. I distribute this negative on through, I end up with negative 3x minus 7. Combining my like terms, it looks like my 3x's cross out, my 7's cross out. And when I'm done doing that, I'm just left with 3h all over h. The h is crossed out, and my answer is 3. Okay, on this last problem, on number 17, it says it just wants me to sketch the graph of the linear function. So sketching this graph, y equals mx plus b. So remember, m is your slope, negative 1/3. B is the y-intercept, which is equal to 1. So to graph this, we can go to our y-intercept, which is at 1. So I make my graph, I put a dot here at 1, and now it says my slope is at negative 1/3, so I'm going to go down 1 and over 3. So going down 1 and over 3, there's my second point. I draw in my line, and that is what my graph looks like.